My name is Ali, I'm a doctor and YouTuber.
I'm Taymor, I'm a data scientist and writer,
And you're listening to Not Overthinking.
the weekly podcast where we think about happiness, creativity, and the human condition.
Hello and welcome back to Not Overthinking. We're very sorry we missed an episode last week. We were just feeling exceptionally lazy.
We've just gotten back from Bath, where we are attending a wedding of one of my best friends, Arthur, a friend from university.
I thought your speech was very good.
Oh, thank you.
It started off with the classic bait and switch.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give us a re-rendition of the bait and switch?
The bait and switch. Okay, yeah. So I think bait and switch is like a really good way to start off the speech because it kind of throws people off. And I kind of nicked the concept from Kevin Hart, where he has a bit. This is from like really early on. This I'll link the YouTube video in the show notes.
What are you ready?
If I remember, yeah. We're basically like right when he was like 19 years old or something. There's like a video of him doing stand-up, and he basically starts off by saying something along the lines of, before I start, I just want to let y'all know that however he talks. He does a thing where he says basically, before I start, I want to let you all know that he says something along the lines of like. These are what I'm gonna do now. These are just jokes or something. I don't want none of y'all coming up to me.
All right, stop laughing and recount the anecdote.
I don't want none of y'all coming up to me after the show talking about who's the funny one now. He's basically implying that people will get angry at what he's saying and want to beat him up after the show.
Yeah, why is that a bait and switch?
No, because the bait and switch is that he basically says, before I start, like, I want to tell you some stuff. And so, like, you don't actually expect that he started. He has actually started at that point because he's doing a bit.
Oh, right.
He's doing a bit where he's like, I don't want you coming up to me saying like, oh, who's the funny one now kind of thing, And so...
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So that was sort of what you did right at the start of yours.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I opened the speech.
Oh, right. So by bait and switch, I meant your other bit where you were like, well, when I first got to university.
Oh, that bit.
That's why I was so confused.
Oh,
by what you were
that's the
talking
classics. That's I think the old switcheroo.
Oh, that's what it's called. It's not a bait and switch.
I don't know what the technical terms
Anyway,
are.
Can you give us a re-rendition of the start of the speech?
Which bit?
Just like the first,
the very
seconds, the first 30 seconds.
Okay, sure. So the speech started. I said, before I start, I just want to let you know I was pulled aside by the groom earlier today, and I was told that there are a few topics that are off limits for this speech. Look, it doesn't really make sense to sort of say these things on the podcast, but like, yeah, it's just like it just allows you to sort of say three kind of throwaway statements that are kind of funny on their own without much.
Look, I just wanted you to start off the podcast with a bit of banter, and now here you are overthinking why you don't want to say. Just like say the thing. Come on, man.
I don't think it'll be entertaining. All right, no. I'll say the bit that I think is like pretty generally applicable. So I said, Arthur and I have been friends since the start of university. The start of university is a fun time, but for me it was also a bit of an anxious one. I was quite worried at the start about, whether I'd make friends and whether I'd fit in. But I was really lucky that on the first day I met someone who I instantly clicked with, someone who was funny and friendly and kind. And then the following week, I met Arthur. And yeah, Arthur's the groom, and so you...
And then everyone's like, ha, yeah.
Yeah, you're meant to like take the piss out of the groom.
Okay, cool. Anyway, what are we talking about this week?
So this week, I've had what I consider to be a novel insight.
A profound insight.
A profound and novel insight.
Profoundly novel, okay.
Which is that... I'm going to say the insight.
Good. Please do.
I think a lot of the gains I've made in my personal life have come from treating it more like a business. And a lot of the gains that I've made in my business life have come from treating it a lot more personally.
Oh, that is profound.
How about that?
I sense that's profound and novel.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that? What do you mean? At the moment, he's just taking a sip of his tea without the pinky sticking out.
So I think like when it comes to sort of personal life stuff, I think previously I never really... Okay, no. Let me backtrack. I think the defining characteristic of thinking in like a business mode versus thinking in like a personal mode is that I think in business mode, you kind of approach things a lot more, and I don't like this word, but a lot more sort of rationally, because you don't have like emotional attachment to the resources, the resources being like time and money. The business has some amount of money, each employee or whatever has a certain amount of time, and you really are trying to optimize for deploying those resources most effectively. And so I think when you're sort of trying to prioritize things in a business or trying to decide what to do, you can think very clearly in terms of, okay, what is the cost of this thing in terms of time and money? And you can sort of value time according to how much you pay your employees and things. You can work out like roughly the cost of something, and then you can figure out, okay, what's the return on investment for this thing? And then you can decide whether or not you want to do this thing. And I think that's a very good way to approach any kind of resource allocation problem. And I think a lot of our personal lives are actually resource allocation problems. Like, how should I spend my time? How should I spend my money? And I think the kind of default mode of approaching these when it comes to personal stuff is basically feels over reals, if you will.
Feels over reals.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think the business mode thinking, from what I've seen, is characterized by reals.
Reals over feels.
Yeah, reals over,
Okay,
just
so
reals. And personal mode thinking is characterized by feels.
So at the moment you're speaking very abstractly, and I know what you're getting at, but a lot of our audience might not have their own business or might be intimately familiar with the ins and outs of profit and loss for businesses. Can you give us a few concrete examples of what you mean by business thinking when it comes to time and money allocation?
Okay, so for example, one thing that lots of businesses need to do is acquire customers. You need to get people to hear what you're trying to say, right? And there are lots of ways to do this. There are you could take out some Google ads. You can spend a whole day finding people's emails from LinkedIn and sending them personalized emails yourself. You can, ask your friends to introduce people to you who might want to use your product and so on. And so you're trying to acquire customers. And one of the ways in which we sort of thinking about this at the startup right now is like, okay, what are the sort of the various channels at our disposal? One of the channels is like sending cold emails to people who we think might be a good fit. So like finding people on LinkedIn who we think could use our product, writing them an email, sending it over, and maybe 5% of people who get these emails will reply. Another way is that we could, create some kind of content like a blog post or an interactive demo, put it on our website, and hopefully that'll get some traffic and it might go viral or something, and that'll get a lot of people signing up to our website, right? Now it's hard to compare. I don't know. I think if I was approaching this, or for example, we can just take out a bunch of ads. And I think if I was approaching this problem from a personal life standpoint, I would I actually don't know how I'd think about it. But from the business standpoint, it's okay, we can literally try and figure out what is the cheapest way to get customers, writing a blog post is going to take me 1 week in total, 1 week of full-time work for a really good blog post. I don't know. And so we can kind of figure out, okay, how much is that worth? And then, okay, what's the chance of this going viral on Twitter or something? And how many leads do we think we'll get from this? Facebook ads and things are a lot easier to calculate. They basically tell you, look, if you spend £100, then 5,000 people will see your post. And then things like cold emails is okay, what do we think the rough sort of response rate is to these things? How much time would we spend and so on?
Okay, so overall what you're saying is that when it's in a business context, you're actively thinking about the return on investment of each of these different channels, and deciding which is the cheapest per sort of where the cost per acquisition is cheapest, where you're valuing time but also money.
Yeah,
whereas
precisely.
writing a blog post will just take time and doesn't cost any money.
Yeah.
And reaching out sending cold emails on LinkedIn just takes time and no money. But actually running Google ads and Facebook ads will take money but no time.
Yeah, precisely. I think that the crux of the matter is, when it comes to things related to business, you have this wonderful thing called money that allows you to compare otherwise difficult to compare things. Money it lets you sort of compare all sorts of different options, including things that don't really have a direct monetary cost.
So including
or
time.
value.
So you could say if you were to spend a week doing a blog post and you value your time in the company as whatever per hour, or is that how you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think this is one example of a helpful framing when it comes to personal stuff, because, for example, in a business context, if we're thinking of buying some new piece of software to help us automate something, we will literally sit down and think, okay, how much time are we spending on this random task currently? How much do these people want for it? Okay, it's £1,000 a month. Sounds like a lot of money, right? But if £1,000 a month saves you 30 hours every month, that's a bargain, right? And so things that sound like a lot of money from a personal point of view are very easy to justify and are good investments. Whereas I think in personal life, and this is sort of related to the stuff we talked about, the kitchen bin and measure and all this kind of stuff, plenty of things sound like a lot of money, even though they're good investments. And I think when we're thinking about our personal lives, we basically go on like our first order reactions to these things. It's like, oh, kitchen bin, £120. That sounds like a lot of money. That's a bit expensive. Or like, oh man, this thing is like, I don't know, this thing is going to take up 2 hours. Painting my room myself is going to take up a whole Saturday, but it's like free or something. So that's better than paying someone to do it. You know, this kind of thinking.
So essentially what you're saying is that thinking in a business setting encourages us to value our time.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Okay, what are the other parts of it? Because that sounds like the main thing that this whole...
Yeah, I think that's one thing.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that I think the way that we're sort of... Yeah, I think basically every business does this, right? You kind of approach things in terms of like systems as opposed to in terms of like discrete things that happen.
Okay, what do you mean?
So, for example, let's say that during 1 week, someone makes a big mistake at a company or something. Like someone does something by accident. You know, you accidentally, deploy some code to production that kind of breaks your website or something for 24 hours. Okay. Someone accidentally does that.
Right.
Now, in a personal context, I think previously, to be honest, I don't know how I would have handled this kind of situation, but I think maybe what I've done is sort of feel really bad. If it was me, I'd like feel really bad about it, feel really sorry about it. I think the people around me, I don't know how they would have reacted. Maybe they would have gotten angry. Maybe they would have, not trusted me anymore or something like this if you make a big mistake. Whereas I think in a business context, it's less about like, you made this mistake, you are bad, and more about, okay, how do we make sure it's not even possible to make these kinds of mistakes in the future? How do we have a system so that these mistakes don't get made? And I think businesses approach almost everything in terms of systems and processes. Like you manage your work on like weekly or bi-weekly sprints, for example. At the end of each sprint, you have like a review of how well things went. You explicitly talk about what went well, what didn't go well, how you can improve your own process the next time around.
Okay, but we almost never do that in the personal realm.
Yeah, that would be considered extremely weird in the personal realm. I think probably the two main ways in which I think the business versus personal thing apply are in terms of like trying to value things as a level playing field. And I think money is a good way to try and do that. So thinking in terms of like, how much do I value my time? I think that's helpful in the personal sphere. And then also thinking in terms of like, what systems am I running in my life? And when things go wrong, how do I improve those systems to ensure they don't go wrong again? And I think there's a lot of like social weirdness around having systems for your personal life. And so, for example, I'm actually really bad at this, and I should definitely have more systems in my life. But for the past few years, I've had precisely 2 systems in my life, and I'm continually astounded at how well they work. The first system is that basically for the past 8 years, my passport is never out of my zip pocket in my bag for more than the time that I need it. Every time I need my passport, I take it out of the zip pocket, and even if I'm feeling lazy and it's like, oh, I'll put it back in there later, I think, no, this is like one of my 2 systems in life. I need to stick this back in a zip pocket.
Yep.
And I have not lost my passport a single time. And that is extremely off-brand for me.
Okay.
The other system that I've had for the past couple of years since I've had a bike is that every time after I lock my bike, I put the bike key in another zip pocket in my bag. And every time after I use the lock, I put the lock in my bag, as opposed to just hang it on the handlebars or whatever. And so that ensures that every time I have my rucksack on me, which is always whenever I'm riding my bike, I have my lock and I have my key. And I'm never going to arrive at the train station without a lock or without a key and be screwed. And it just works. And every time I open up my bag and open up the zip pocket and the key is there, I'm like, wow, this is insane. I need
putting stuff away in the right place.
And yeah, it's crazy how well that works and how much better my life is because I don't have to deal with losing my passport or losing my bike lock key. And having more systems in my life would definitely make it significantly better. All right, I've talked for a bit. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Okay, so let's start with the systems thing just because that's the point that we're on.
Okay, I'm saying businesses operate in terms of systems. People generally don't. People would benefit from operating a bit more in terms of systems.
How are you defining system?
I guess just any kind of process or protocol.
That doesn't require additional thinking.
Yeah, I guess.
So essentially what you're defining as a system, what other people might define as a habit. For example, you said that those are the only two systems in your life, and yet you brush your teeth every day, or so we hope. Why are you not calling that a system, for example? Like, oh my God, it's an incredible system. Like, all I have to do is spend 2 minutes brushing my teeth every day, and then
they
my
never
teeth,
rot.
my teeth don't fall off. Like, insane, incredible. Like, why is that not one of your systems in your head?
Okay, I guess there are some. Okay, I think systems and habits is a fair point. Is a fair thing to say. Look, I guess there are some habits that we're just like taught from a young age and taught by society that everyone basically does, like brushing your teeth and going to bed and waking up in the morning and things like that, right? Like you don't need to come up with that for yourself. And so I think there is a distinction there.
Okay, so your definition of system is one that you've actively thought out.
Yeah, something that's suited to you.
Whereas your definition of habit is something that's
I'm not saying they're necessarily different things.
Okay. Because I can think of a lot of helpful habits that I've got in my life that I might call systems just because I feel I'm feeling a bit nerdy. But essentially what I think you're arguing for is to be more intentional about the habits that we've formed based on sort of the same sort of principles, the same sort of systems-based thinking that a business might use. So, for example, one system that I've got for making my sleep better is that I got blackout curtains, which is a good system. I got a nice fan, which is a good system. And I put my phone across the room from me, which is a great system, with my Kindle on the bedside table. And all that works together to mean that I'm not using my phone before bed. And that has revolutionized my sleep hygiene and stuff.
Okay, I know the distinction. The distinction is a habit. Habit refers to like the single kind of action that you do, which is kind of like a standalone thing. Whereas a system is like interconnected and stuff. And yeah, a big part of like thinking in terms of systems is understanding how different things affect one another and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's not too different in terms of terminology.
This actually reminds me of something that I think James Clear tweeted about at one point, saying, I think the phrase he used was that a system is just a collection of habits.
Oh, really?
So, oh, damn, it seems like someone's got there first. Okay, let's park the systems thing aside for now. On the time valuing front, I'm obviously a big fan of valuing time. I'm curious, how much do you value your own time at these days?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay, so think about it. I suppose, like, how much money would you be willing to spend in order to save an hour of time doing something that you don't want to do?
I think I have a number in my head, but I don't think there's any point saying it because it's heavily skewed by what I do for, in inverted commas, a living and the leverage that activity has. I mean, there's just no point. Yeah, I don't think it's useful.
So I think I first came across this topic of this concept of valuing your time. I think kind of when I was going down the rabbit hole of having read the 4-Hour Workweek and then looking at all the other sort of literature in that regard. And at the time, that really changed the way I thought about this stuff, because before I just never really given any consideration to what I thought my time was worth.
Okay.
But then afterwards, I started realizing that actually me spending a whole day painting the house when painting the house is not something I enjoy doing. It's probably not worth it if I can pay someone for a certain amount of money to do the same thing for me.
Yeah.
But I think even in life today, like when I'm thinking about it in terms of my business, I'm much more valuing of my time than when I'm thinking about it in my personal life, because I don't know, like I almost never think about the time value of driving somewhere as like time wasted.
Yeah, because you can do useful stuff in the car, like listen to a podcast or whatever. It's not really completely lost time.
Okay, anyway, I think we're being derailed here. So your analogy was that we should think more of our personal lives as businesses, yeah, by having a certain value on our time, and also by thinking more in terms of systems, like how things are interconnected. And rather than, for example, if something goes wrong, rather than treating it personally, just building a different system around it.
Yeah, precisely. And I think the main point around the systems thing is actually that there is a strong sort of general bias in society against having systems for personal stuff. Like, it seems like there's a general narrative of like, the more systematic you are, the more kind of like,
the less sincere.
Yeah, the less sincere, the more like weird / nerdy / robotic or whatever.
So like having a system for keeping in touch with friends would be considered weird.
Yes.
And yet everyone thinks it's all right to have a calendar with your friends' birthdays on it.
Yeah, I mean...
So I suppose there's some kind of spectrum between sort of what people in general would think is a weird level of systemization.
Yeah, and I think, like, to be honest, the most acceptable level of systemization, which is extremely low level, is like having one place in your house where you put your keys, hanging your keys up. Yeah. If you're more systematic than that, people will think, oh man, he's so neurotic. He's so like OCD or whatever, like if you're really particular about how you do certain things, it's considered weird, especially when it comes to like social stuff. So actually in the third year of uni, I decided to start tracking my social interactions, and I built my own little personal CRM. CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management. It's software that every business uses to track basically which customers they're talking to, what they're saying to these customers, and so on. So I had this like basically database using Airtable, fantastic product, where every time I'd have a social interaction, I'd make a note of who it was with, and the date, and some notes about like what it was. And I sort of got it to notify me that, oh, you haven't spoken to so-and-so in 2 weeks. And so then I could see, oh man, like these are all my friends. This is when I last spoke to each of them. I should like go and hang out with this person. It was kind of, I think it was a nice idea, but it was too much effort to do the data entry for it. And so I kind of didn't end up using it for very long. But the few people who I told about it thought it was extremely weird.
So I wrote an email about this, like towards the end of university, when it was one of my weekly email newsletters where I'd read all this stuff about how once you graduate from university, loneliness is like a big, like an epidemic, especially once you have a job and stuff, because there just is less time to see your friends.
Yep.
And so I decided I was going to make like a Google Sheet. This was before Notion was a thing. A Google Sheet with like the friends I wanted to keep in touch with, and kind of remind myself on a sort of 2 to 3 monthly basis who I hadn't spoken to in a while.
2 to 3 monthly? Damn.
I mean, it was quite a long list of friends at the time, but now kind of about 18 months into having graduated from university, this list has now gotten significantly smaller because I've realized just how few people it is actually reasonable to keep in touch with. But apart from with a handful of friends, I haven't really systematized this thing. So, for example, I've got an Evernote notebook that called People, where I have a handful of different notes for different friends, and when I have dinner with them, then I kind of write a few notes about this conversation. But actually, the app Notion, they've recently released a personal CRM template that I have been dabbling with. So this is something I actually do want to systemize.
Oh, nice.
Much more.
Yeah.
Especially since like a few weeks ago, I rediscovered this thing of that you can like call your friends on the phone. And that was like, oh my God, like completely game changing, because I drive like an hour to work and back every day. And I was thinking that time is, just spent consuming content like audiobooks and podcasts and on double speed. But then one time a few weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a colleague at work, and she suggested that, why don't you just talk to your friends in the car? And I was like,
that's sick. That's really good.
So I put my AirPods in that day on the way home from work. I tried calling like 4 friends. No one replied. And then I called a 5th. And then I had a great chat with Sahel. So Sahel, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry that you were number 5 on the list. But I was literally just going through like my WhatsApp in reverse chronological order, I think.
Amazing.
And initially I felt really weird about this. He was like, hey Ollie, what's up? And I was like, oh, just fancy to catch up. And in my head I had all this like fear of rejection, like, oh my God, I bet he's going to sound busy, and then I have to act nonchalant. I'd be like, oh no, it's totally cool. Because that actually would have been cool. Like I actually wouldn't have minded. He was like, okay, cool, yeah, I've got about 40 minutes before I have to go to work. What's been going on? And we ended up having just like a 40-minute chat and just like catching up how we would have in real life.
That's awesome.
Which was just nice. So
yeah, that's really great.
I want to do more of that, but I want to build like a system in place, like a personal CRM to do this.
Yeah, that's cool. And actually, I think, every now and then I find out that someone who I see as like cool and well-adjusted, I find out that they have a system for something. And I think, whoa, are you allowed to do that? I thought you were cool, man. And
well, like what?
There's a friend of mine who, slightly older friend, he basically, after every dinner, he sends you an email with notes about what you guys discussed over dinner. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that way, like, whatever stuff you discuss sticks with everyone better. You have like a record of it. You can look back on it, all of this kind of stuff. But like, making post-dinner notes and emailing them around to all the attendees
that's really weird.
It's a system of his. And it's bloody weird. But
that's
it's great.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. How did you find out about the system?
I got an email after a dinner.
And you were like, wait a minute, what is this?
Yeah.
And you replied saying like, what the hell is this?
No, he opened the email with like, this is a weird thing I do.
Oh, okay. So he was self-aware about the weirdness of it.
Yeah, of course he was.
Oh.
But you wouldn't guess it. You wouldn't guess it from this guy that he does this kind of stuff. And so I think there's like, yeah, certainly, yeah, I think like the kind of weird aspect of it is like, oh, yeah, we just don't even think of doing things like this, or even if we do think of them, we think, oh, that's too weird to have these kinds of systems. Whereas in like a business context, hell yeah, of course someone's going to be making notes during a meeting and circulating the notes via email to all the attendees.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
It's stupid not to, right?
Oh, damn, that's a really good point. I should start doing this. Okay, have we got any other examples of systems that kind of start off in the business sphere but then translate to the personal sphere? One obvious one is things like to-do lists and calendars, which are obviously initially in the business sphere.
Oh my God, calendars. Yes,
yeah.
Calendars is so good.
Calendars are completely next level. I think I started keeping a proper calendar from like, a calendar for my like timetable in first year.
Yeah.
But then it was only in like fourth year where I was seeing my friends more sporadically that I realized I was double booking things.
Yeah.
And then at that time I had friends who would call me out on this.
Yeah.
Whereas prior to that point, it was just sort of a given that, if you're an Asian, you would flake on some social event and be like, whatevs.
Yeah.
But then when it started to get into fourth year, where my friends would get annoyed that I was flaking on them, I realized that as soon, the instant a commitment comes in, it goes straight into the calendar.
Yep.
And literally, like, I paid about £30 for this calendar app called Fantastical, just because it had this natural language processing thing, which means I can just write things like next Tuesday dinner with Sahil at 7 p.m. at Covent Garden, and it would just automatically populate, and I don't have to think about it.
Yep.
Whereas before, I would have had to go on my Google Calendar and kind of drag and drop the timings of the events and all that stuff. And that's completely changed the game, because now anytime Mimi says, hey, are you free on the 26th? I'm like, let me check my calendar.
Yeah.
I look at my calendar, and if there's nothing in it, I know I'm free.
Yeah.
And that's an incredible system.
Yeah, I mean, I feel exactly the same way about calendars. My calendar runs my life now. I think a lot of my friends are also big fans of calendars, because like at work and stuff, I don't know about medicine, but if you work in any kind of company, everything is done via like calendar invitations and things like that.
It's not really a thing in medicine, but I appreciate it in every other field.
Yeah, precisely. And so like a lot of my friends who like work in London as well, everyone really appreciates it when you send over like a calendar invite to all the attendees for like dinner with the lads,
Nice.
7 to 10 p.m. or whatever. And then it's like, everyone loves it. And previously I might have considered that to be like a weird thing to do. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, so one of my YouTube friends and colleagues, Thomas Frank, has this like online productivity masterclass in which one of the sort of 15-minute long lessons is how to use a calendar. And initially when I saw that, I was like, wait a minute, isn't that like really basic? But then I realized that actually it's not like, I only discovered this at the age of like 22, already 4 years into university, like the importance of having a calendar.
Yeah.
So it is definitely something that needs to be propagated more. I suppose kind of next level calendar system is the people who block out times on their calendar to do certain tasks.
Yes.
So, for example, if I know that people who know they have to write an article would block out 6 to 10 p.m. on a Wednesday evening to write that article and would kind of run their life on it.
Yep.
Which is kind of similar to your pilot and plane analogy. Do you want to remind the viewers, if they haven't read your blog posts, what the idea behind that is? Because I think that's quite a good system.
Yeah, I think the theory basically is that there are a few points in the day when we have genuine clarity about our lives, and we should spend those fleeting moments planning out how we want to spend the rest of our time. And so back when I had a real job and would commute on the train every day, my time on the train would be spent like planning out like the rest of my day and the rest of my week and like what I want to be doing and things like that. And so I'd like plan, okay, this evening I'm going to be like doing this or whatever and so on. Whereas most of the time, if you just get back from work or something, you're really tired, you're like really prone to giving into your sort of base instincts. Like you're basically intoxicated. There's like a few points during the day when you're not intoxicated. You should spend that time planning out how to spend the rest of your time, and the rest of your time you should just be executing on that plan rather than making decisions about how to spend your time.
So where does the pilot and the plane come into this?
I guess you should see yourself as a pilot some of the time and a plane most of the time. The pilot like sets the direction and the bearings and stuff, and then most of the time you're just the plane. You're just like flying along that bearing.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And so that's sort of what we're talking about with this whole calendar time block. I think it's actually called time blocking.
Yeah.
Apparently Elon Musk uses it or something.
Basically everyone uses it. Everyone.
So the other systems that relate to this are things like to-do lists. Now, the problem with to-do lists is that everyone has tried to use a to-do list at some point in their lives, but what most of us fail to do with to-do lists is that we don't trust the system enough. Like, we don't put every single thing we have to do in our to-do list. We put some percentage of things we have to do in our to-do list.
Yeah.
And the rest, for some reason, we still store in our heads. And one of the key insights of David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, which is like the world's Bible in productivity, is that, look, man, when you've got a to-do list, you just literally put every single thing that's on your mind in that list so that you completely offload your own brain from that storage of information, and so you can completely rely on the system, and he refers to it as a system. And since I started doing this, I feel like it feels like almost like a physical load off of my shoulders when I go to bed at night, at peace, because I know that there is nothing in my head that's left over from things I need to do.
Yeah.
And if there ever is, like at any point in the day, I've got the Todoist app on my Apple Watch, I will literally tap on it, use the dictation to, transcribe a thing, and I just add it to my to-do list.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And I suppose kind of the next level of that system is actually checking the to-do list every day and getting stuff out of the inbox into different projects.
Yeah.
That is the level that I'm still trying to get to. But the first step is always just to capture absolutely everything in our lives, put it into the list.
Yeah. I think the interesting question is, like, why is it considered weird to have systems for things? Am I right in saying it's like considered weird?
I think it depends what the things, as in, like, no one's going to think it's weird to put, buy birthday present on a to-do list. That's not weird at all.
I think a to-do list is a socially acceptable system to have in your life, like a grocery list or something, right?
Yeah.
Like that is socially acceptable. Whereas stuff like a personal CRM,
yeah. So I think all the socially unacceptable ones are the ones in where society feels like you're overthinking social interaction, because society has told us that that social interaction is only sincere if it's spontaneous.
Is that the only category of weird systems in life?
One system that I thought was. That my initial reaction to was, this is a bit weird, is our productivity guru Tiago Forte. He's a guy, fortelabs.com, I think, or .co. We'll put a link in the show notes. He's got a good blog about productivity and stuff. But he's got this interesting collection of blog posts, which are that every year he does like an annual review thing. And an annual review is nothing new if you're into like tech and stuff, because everyone sort of does it. But on his, he makes it public, and B, he talks about like really personal things. Like he had this one section where he's like, where I want my life to be in 25 years from now, and kind of wrote out a script of what his ideal day would look like. And it was saying stuff like, actually, I'm going to read it. Have you got your phone? Because I was recording this.
Yep.
Face ID worked for me on your phone.
No.
Oh my God.
No, it was already unlocked.
No, Face ID literally worked for me on your phone.
There is a very small chance that's true.
Anyway, okay, so he's got this thing called the personal narrative vision, which is like an annual thing that he does where he narrates what his ideal life would look like. So here's an example of his personal narrative vision 2017. I wake up in a clean, beautiful, yet minimally furnished apartment in a vibrant neighborhood in Mexico City. Lauren and I are married, working on a mix of projects that profoundly impact communities in the world and fill us with excitement and passion. We eat a light, healthy breakfast in a light-filled kitchen, setting our intentions for the day and coordinating our plans. We both meditate and exercise every day, maintaining balance and mindfulness every moment. Our days are full of conversations, relationships, and communities. We do all our work in collaboration with each other and with others. Our family and friends are deeply connected and integrated into our lives, and we contribute to them in every way we know how, or even some we don't. I go to work in a local co-working space where I know everyone and am known as a leader and connector of people. I work hard but without suffering. Each day has a strong unifying intention, either free of appointments so I can focus on producing something, or open and spontaneous to make myself available to people who need me. I remain faithful to the day's intention while also remaining adaptive to whatever life throws my way. So that's just an example of his personal narrative vision.
Okay.
But when I read that, I was like, oh, this feels somewhat weird, because it feels very personal, and it feels like I was almost voyeuristically intruding on his personal life that he's chosen to share online, and which I've now read out to this podcast. But that's like an incredible system, like having this annual review where you're asking yourself a series of like genuinely important questions. So for example, other questions that he's got on his list, he recommends that you ask yourself, what are your top 3 wins for the year? What are the biggest lessons you've learned? What were the risks you took? What was your most loving service? What is your unfinished business from the year? What are you happy about completing? And a long list of like 25 different things.
Yeah.
Which to me initially seemed like a weird system, but it's so useful.
Yeah. And I think having this kind of review system, I've been thinking that I need to implement like a more granular one where like every week I'll sit down on a Sunday evening and reflect on like, okay, what went well this week? What are my actions for next week? This kind of stuff. Basically doing like a sprint retrospective on my own life.
So this is David Allen's thing of a weekly review.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, which is literally exactly that. Every single week you kind of initially empty all your inboxes, empty your physical in tray, empty your trash, put everything into the right project, then decide and reflect on all the...
And look, I don't know, maybe I'm like oversensitive to this or something, but I really feel like for example, if someone had this system and it somehow got out to their friends and family that they had this system, this would be a funny thing that, look, no one's like going to seriously, it's just teasing or whatever, but this would be a thing like, hey, get what this guy does every week. He sits down,
and reflects on his life priorities. My God, what a nerd. That was similar to the reaction I had when I first started, trying to count calories. Everyone at work was like, what the hell are you doing, man? Just enjoy life.
Yeah. So I think that is something which is outside of the realm of social interaction, but where having a system is still considered weird. Or is it not actually considered that weird? Is that in my head?
I think the weekly review thing is in your head, like, especially because people would consider you a productive person.
I don't know anyone. I actually don't know many people who would consider me a productive person.
Oh, well, whatever. I think other systems that would be considered weird are when things that we think should be spontaneous become systematized. For example, tracking your calories. Most people would say is probably a bit weird, at least initially. But it's considered less weird if you're trying to train for something in particular.
Yeah.
If you're competing in a weightlifting marathon or whatever those things are called, then people won't find it weird at all that you're tracking your macros. Whereas just in general day-to-day life, it probably would be a thing. And kind of when you're tracking your calories, you kind of have to give an excuse that, I'm on a diet, or I'm trying to lose weight. Sorry, guys, don't mind if I take a photo of all these barcodes.
Is it that like quantification of things is generally considered weird in personal stuff, but quantification is like very important in almost everything when it comes to business?
Yeah, perhaps it's the quantification thing. Let's go with that.
Does it like, I think maybe like trying to quantify something removes some of the magic and the romance of it all. And I think maybe that's what doesn't feel right when it comes to having systems for personal stuff. Is that it? I think it's a possibility.
There's this whole field of business called systems thinking. Like, have you come across that phrase?
I've come across the phrase many times, but it's one of those things that I haven't looked into, but I feel like I've come across it enough times to have inferred what it referred, like the general ideas of it.
And I'm pretty sure that the general ideas of it are what we've just talked about.
I think they might be.
Yeah. I've also never really looked into it. I just saw that Tiago had tagged his post as systems thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, I've seen that many times before.
Yeah, systems thinking is one of those like kind of buzzwords that everyone in tech and I'm sure other places was like, oh man, it's all about first principles thinking. It's all about systems thinking. Everyone's kind of touting this phrase. I haven't looked into it. It might be what we're talking about. But again, it's a business thing.
Okay, so going back to your initial novel and profound insight was that we should treat our personal lives more like a business.
Yeah.
That was in terms of tracking our time, tracking the value of our time, and figuring out what the return on investment is of the various things that we're doing, as well as thinking, systems thinking in our personal lives.
Yep.
And then the flip side of that was, I guess we'll spend less time on because this isn't really a business podcast, was treating your business more like your personal life.
Yeah.
What, so like more focused on relationships or...
Yeah, for me, that's sort of a big part of it for me. I kind of use, I think a lot of value from like, a lot of business value comes from having friends. And it's worth making friends along the way, even if there's no obvious way in which these people are going to help your business. That's just how I feel about it.
Okay. Yeah, and I suppose that's how we do treat our personal lives.
Yeah.
Whereas in business, I guess we can be too focused on the metrics, on the return on investment, that, there's no point having this meeting with this person because...
Yeah. And, a lot of the time that's the right thing to do, but some of the time, I think...
So one area in which I found these two to sort of coalesce in a way is this standing offer that I have on my website that if anyone comes to visit Cambridge, I will buy them a coffee, no questions asked. And so about once a week, I meet up with a random person who wants to hang out with me. And some of these have been genuinely like have moved the needle in terms of my own personal and business metrics, and others of them have just been fairly just chill conversations.
Yeah.
And so I sometimes think like, I've got like 4 messages that I need to reply to that I've left on unread for all wanting to meet up at some point next week, and I don't really have a system for this, but I know that but I want to meet up with these people just because it's always nice.
Yeah.
And because you never know what good things might come of the serendipitous interactions with others.
Yeah.
But given that a lot of these interactions are probably ROI negative, i.e. the return, if I were to spend that hour or 2 hours making a video instead, it would probably have far greater value just in the short term.
Yeah.
And yet I, want to hang out anyway because it's sort of like treating my business, i.e. the YouTube thing, as part of my personal life in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be honest, I haven't really fleshed out that side of this idea. I mean, I haven't fleshed out either side of this idea. I proposed it to you a few hours ago when we were in Bath, and now we're talking about it on the podcast. So, yeah, it's just something I've been mulling over. But yeah, I'm particularly interested in like why it's weird to have systems. Because I do think it's considered weird.
Okay, so your task for this week is to poll your friends on whether it's weird to have systems. This can be like your next, the Neil Strauss opener. So instead of who lies more, men or women, which is like a classic kind of pickup artist line from 2002, it can be like, hey, let me get your opinion on something. Is it weird if someone keeps a list of all their friends and whether they keep in touch with them?
Yeah,
that would actually make for a really
I'd be very
conversation.
interested to get people's opinions on that.
Yeah.
Of course, if you're listening and you have an opinion on that, do send it to us via Twitter or via email.
Have we got a Twitter account?
We don't have a podcast Twitter account.
Oh, okay. We've got personal Twitters, and you check Twitter more than I do.
Yeah. I check Twitter a lot.
Many times.
I do not need a system to make sure I check Twitter.
But yeah, genuinely, if you have anything to share on the topic, please do email us in. Actually, one of the emails that we had this week was actually an audio clip. Like someone recorded a voice memo, or whatever, on their phone and emailed us the MP3 file.
Yeah.
And that was A, really fun and interesting to listen to because you can hear their voice. And B, it means that if we do discuss it, we can easily play it on the podcast.
Yeah.
So if you're up for it, then please do actually send us a voice memo, a voice recording of yourself, just sharing your thoughts on anything that we've discussed. And it would be a lot easier then to share those on a podcast. Plus, it would add a bit more interest other than just us reading out an email.
Yeah. And we caught up on a bunch of emails, or rather, I caught up on a bunch of emails in the car on the way home today.
While I was driving.
Fine. All right. I guess it was a joint effort. So yeah, thanks to everyone who emailed in. Please continue to do that. We really, really like it.
Cool. I think that's a wrap for today's discussion. So I feel like we still haven't fully fleshed out this idea, but it is very provisional. Basically, treat if we're going to give some advice, it's to treat personal lives more like businesses, i.e. track your time, track the value of your time, figure out whether the return on investment of your time and money is positive based on your own personal outcome measures. That's another thing businesses do. They have like a mission statement and they have like goals and like
and metrics and
metrics,
KPIs,
stuff that they're trying to track. Have you got any insights of the week, Taimur? What happens?
Have I got any insights this week? Let me check Twitter and find out.
Meanwhile, I'm checking my ideas list on Notion for the various things I wrote this week. So what I'm going to write about in this week's email newsletter is sort of an insight that I've begun to have these last few weeks to months, which I think I've talked about before on this podcast. It's about how the podcasts that we listen to really affect the way we think. And what made me think about this was that there was an episode of the My First Million podcast where the host was interviewing someone who was like an early Bitcoin investor. And they were just like talking about something completely unrelated. They were talking about this, just like the general people having a self-belief that they'll be able to figure stuff out. So, for example, the host of this podcast, when he was like in his 20s or whatever, he just moved to Silicon Valley because he knew that was where all the tech stuff was happening.
Yeah.
And he didn't really have a plan. He just knew he'd be able to figure it out. And he felt that amongst his friends who were, quote, successful or who had done, quote, interesting things in tech and whatever other sphere, they all had this shared trait that they had this unshakable self-belief that whatever happened, they'd be able to figure something out.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of his other friends who were more like, oh, I want to get started, but I haven't started anything yet and probably never would, didn't really have that internal belief.
Okay.
And that wasn't the insight. Where the insight was what kind of after they had a discussion about this, what he said immediately after. And he said, all right, guys, so I guess the lesson is if you have that quality, then, maintain it because it's going to be a complete superpower. And if you don't have that quality, then focus on developing it. And that was that. But it was just the casual and nonchalant and obvious way in which he said focus on developing it. I don't think he quite realized that actually that's such a growth mindset way of thinking. And a lot of people would just think, oh, that's just not the person I am.
Yeah.
That's not the sort of thing I can just develop. But it was just so obvious to him and to the guest and he thought to the audience listening to that podcast, it's just obvious.
Yeah.
And so what I found is that along the various podcasts that I've been listening to on double speed for years, it's in a way completely changed my whole perspective on life because now it is not weird at all to start a business, start a YouTube channel or, write a book or anything that seems outside of the ordinary based on the people I hang out with normally.
Yeah.
It just seems so obvious because you're just hearing from all these conversations that for people who consider it obvious.
Yeah.
So that was along the lines of something I want to write about today in this email newsletter that I have to do in the next 3 hours.
That's really similar to the thing we were talking about sort of expanding your box and stuff and sort of immersing yourself in a field until the stuff in that field becomes really obvious and very like normal. Exactly. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, expand the box. I think that might be the title of the newsletter. Well done.
Anytime. Cool. I think that wraps it up for today. This might be the last in-person podcast recording we have for quite a few weeks. I'm going to Hawaii and then Japan from Friday. It's currently Sunday. So the next 4 or 5 podcasts may well be recorded remotely, which will be interesting. I think it'll mean we get better at like doing the remote recording thing.
Wait, so you're saying I could fly to Hawaii as a business expense to record the podcast?
Yeah, man.
I mean, we're not making any money from the podcast. One day, if we get sponsored by Audible or Squarespace,
it's your business, mate. Work out the ROI
and figure it out from there. Yeah, so we'll figure out a way to do this remotely. I wonder if people will actually notice. I wonder if people have known the podcast that we've recorded remotely versus the ones we haven't. But
yeah, that might be interesting.
That'll be interesting. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening. Please do leave us a review on iTunes, whether or not you have iTunes or you use Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.